Urgent. Your soulmate needs you now. What just happened will leave you speechless. My beloved child. Something happened to your soulmate that they never expected, and in the first stunned moments afterward, one thought rose above everything else: you. Not the person standing closest to them. Not the one everyone assumed they would turn to. You. And what makes this so urgent is that your soulmate has spent a long time convincing themselves they could handle everything without reaching for you. They buried words they wanted to say. They swallowed emotions that became harder to hide. But something changed suddenly, and that carefully controlled distance is beginning to collapse. There was a moment when they simply stopped, stared at something in front of them, and realized the truth they had been avoiding. When life became uncertain, their heart still knew exactly where it wanted to go. But there is one detail about what happened that makes this far more serious than an emotional realization. Your soulmate recently discovered something that challenged what they had been told about you. A piece of information reached them unexpectedly, small enough that someone else might have ignored it, but specific enough that your soulmate couldn't. Suddenly, an old conversation began making sense differently. A warning they once believed started sounding suspicious. Even your silence looked different when they reconsidered what had been happening around you both. And then came the part that left them shaken. Someone close to the situation may have known much more than they admitted. Your soulmate began connecting moments that had seemed unrelated, and each connection pointed toward the same possibility, that the distance between you may not have happened as naturally as they once believed. Don't skip, because what they did after realizing this reveals how deeply the truth affected them. Instead of confronting anyone immediately, they went quiet. They needed to know whether their suspicion was real before making a move. Then they found something they weren't supposed to notice. It wasn't dramatic at first. No explosive confrontation. No sudden confession. Just one overlooked detail that contradicted a story your soulmate had accepted for far too long. And once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. Their entire expression changed because this wasn't merely about the past anymore. It meant a decision they had made about you may have been influenced by incomplete information, and someone may have benefited from keeping it that way. That's when your soulmate's need for you became immediate. They started considering reaching out, not someday, not after everything became perfect, but now. Yet before they could decide how to approach you, another unexpected development occurred. Someone realized your soulmate had discovered the contradiction. And instead of explaining themselves, that person did something that made your soulmate understand there was an even bigger truth still being hidden, one involving you directly. The moment that person realized your soulmate had uncovered the contradiction, their entire behavior shifted. Questions were suddenly answered with vague excuses. A conversation that had once seemed harmless was quickly changed whenever your name came up. Your soulmate noticed every detail, especially one strange reaction that confirmed this wasn't simple misunderstanding. So they asked one careful question about you, nothing accusing, nothing dramatic, and the response came far too quickly. It sounded rehearsed. That was when your soulmate understood someone had been preparing for this possibility long before tonight. Instead of arguing, they stayed calm and listened, allowing the other person to keep talking. And that silence worked. Because within minutes, one accidental sentence revealed something nobody intended your soulmate to hear. there had been an attempt to keep certain information from reaching you. That revelation changed everything. Your soulmate immediately began thinking back to moments when they almost contacted you but somehow hesitated after hearing another warning, another opinion, another reason to wait. What once looked like coincidence now formed an uncomfortable pattern. But here is what shocked them most: the hidden information wasn't designed simply to keep them away from you. It may also have been designed to make you believe they had willingly chosen to disappear. Stay till the end, because your soulmate's next discovery made that possibility impossible to dismiss. They found evidence that an important message connected to you had been discussed before they ever knew it existed. Someone had known you were waiting for clarity. Someone knew your soulmate was struggling with what to say. Yet instead of allowing the truth to move naturally between you, that person quietly stepped into the space between both sides. Your soulmate stared at what they had found and whispered your name. But they didn't stop there. For the first time, your soulmate began questioning everything from the beginning, not their feelings for you, but the story surrounding those feelings. Why had certain people become uncomfortable whenever reconciliation seemed possible? Why had your soulmate repeatedly been encouraged to wait whenever they felt ready to speak? And why was someone suddenly nervous now that those old details were being examined? Then another clue appeared. Your soulmate discovered there was one conversation about you that happened much more recently than they had been led to believe, and the person involved had deliberately kept it secret. That was the moment urgency replaced hesitation. Your soulmate reached for their phone, ready to do what they had postponed for far too long. But before they could make contact, a new message appeared on the screen. It came from the very person whose behavior had started raising questions, and the first sentence made your soulmate freeze, because it proved that person already knew exactly what they were about to do. The message was short, but its timing made your soulmate's stomach drop. It didn't directly mention you, yet there was no mistaking what it meant. They were being warned not to make any sudden decisions tonight. Your soulmate read it twice, wondering how this person could possibly know they were seconds away from reaching out to you. Then another message appeared, this one trying to sound casual, asking whether everything was okay. That was the mistake. Your soulmate hadn't told anyone what they had discovered. They hadn't announced that they were questioning the past. So why was someone suddenly checking on them at exactly that moment? Instead of responding, your soulmate put the phone down and realized something unsettling. Whoever had worked so hard to maintain the distance between you was now afraid that distance was about to disappear. That fear gave your soulmate courage. They stopped asking themselves whether contacting you would create complications and started asking a completely different question: what if waiting was exactly what someone else wanted? Suddenly, memories returned with painful clarity. There had been times your soulmate nearly sent you a message, only to pull back because they believed you had moved on. Times they wanted to explain themselves but were convinced you wouldn't listen. And now they were questioning where those assumptions had actually come from. Something huge is waiting for you, because the next clue didn't come from the suspicious person at all. Your soulmate remembered an old exchange they had saved without realizing its importance. They searched through it, slowly at first, until one date caught their attention. That date matched the exact period when everything between you suddenly changed, and attached to it was a detail your soulmate had completely overlooked. It showed that someone had been asking questions about you before the separation became obvious to anyone else. Not innocent questions, either. They wanted to know whether your soulmate still thought about you, whether contact between you continued, and whether your soulmate would respond if you reached out. Suddenly, the interference looked less accidental and far more deliberate. Your soulmate felt anger rising, but beneath that anger was something stronger, regret. Because if they had trusted their own instincts instead of everyone else's voices, perhaps you wouldn't have spent all this time wondering what happened. They picked up their phone again, determined not to be controlled by another warning. This time, their finger moved toward your name without hesitation. But just before they could reach you, something else appeared, an old piece of information connected directly to you that they had somehow never seen before. And when your soulmate opened it, they finally understood why someone had been so desperate to keep the two of you apart. What your soulmate saw wasn't proof that you had stopped caring. It was almost the exact opposite. Buried inside that old information was evidence that you had once tried to create an opening for an honest conversation, at a time when your soulmate had been told you wanted nothing more to do with them. The timing was impossible to ignore. Your attempt had come during the same period when your soulmate was being encouraged to leave you alone and accept that everything between you was finished. For several seconds, they simply stared at the screen. Then came the painful realization: both of you may have been waiting for the other person to move while someone quietly made each of you believe the door was already closed. And suddenly, your soulmate wasn't wondering whether they should contact you anymore. They were wondering how much time had been stolen by a story neither of you had actually written. That realization hit harder than anything else they had discovered. Your soulmate remembered every moment they had interpreted your silence as rejection, and now those memories carried a completely different meaning. They began noticing how often someone else had supplied an explanation for your behavior before your soulmate could ask you directly. Whenever you seemed distant, there was already a reason waiting. Whenever your soulmate considered contacting you, there was always another warning about why it would be a mistake. But one particular memory stood above the rest. There had been a night when your soulmate almost ignored everyone and reached out anyway. Someone close to them had urgently insisted they wait until morning. By morning, your soulmate's confidence was gone. Now they understood why that delay mattered, because the hidden information revealed something had happened during those exact hours, something involving a message meant to change what your soulmate believed about you. Your soulmate immediately searched for anything connected to that night, and this time they weren't looking casually. They compared dates, remembered conversations, and reconstructed the sequence piece by piece. Then they found the detail that made everything go quiet. A message they had always believed came after you pulled away had actually been created before your supposed rejection ever happened. The timeline didn't fit the version they had been given. Someone had rearranged the meaning of events, allowing your soulmate to reach a conclusion that benefited everyone except the two people actually involved. And now your soulmate needed you because there was only one person who could confirm what truly happened: you. Their hand tightened around the phone. They were ready to ask you directly, even if the answer changed everything. But before they could make that move, another notification appeared containing a name your soulmate hadn't expected to see. That person claimed they knew the full story, and they were finally ready to reveal who had started all of this. The name on that notification belonged to someone your soulmate had never considered part of the problem. This person had stayed quietly in the background, rarely giving opinions about you and never appearing interested in what happened between the two of you. That was exactly why their message carried so much weight. They didn't begin with accusations. They simply wrote that your soulmate deserved to know what had really happened before making another decision about you. Then came a detail that made your soulmate sit completely still. This person had witnessed a private conversation during the exact period when you and your soulmate were being pulled apart. They had remained silent because they believed it wasn't their place to interfere. But after realizing the truth was still being hidden, they couldn't stay quiet anymore. And what they revealed next changed the entire meaning of your soulmate's past. According to this person, someone close to your soulmate had become concerned long before the separation that your connection with them was becoming too important. They noticed your soulmate changing, thinking independently, questioning old expectations, and imagining a future that didn't require everyone else's approval. That was when subtle interference began. Nothing obvious enough to expose immediately. Just carefully planted doubts. Selective information. Innocent-sounding questions designed to make your soulmate second-guess what they already knew in their heart. Don't skip, because the witness remembered one sentence from that private conversation almost word for word. Someone had said that if your soulmate spoke directly to you, everything would become harder to control. Your soulmate read that line again and again. Suddenly, this wasn't only about misunderstanding. Someone had been afraid of what an honest conversation between you could uncover. But the witness had one more piece of information, and this was the part that left your soulmate speechless. On the night your soulmate had been persuaded to wait until morning, you apparently hadn't disappeared at all. You had been expecting something. A response, an explanation, some sign that your soulmate still wanted the truth as much as you did. The witness couldn't confirm exactly what you had been told afterward, but they knew your soulmate had never been given the complete picture. That realization broke the last bit of hesitation inside them. Your soulmate no longer wanted second-hand explanations. They needed to hear your version directly, because too many other voices had already spoken for you. They opened your contact again and began typing something simple, something honest. But before sending it, the witness delivered one final message. There was still a missing piece, and it involved something your soulmate themselves had unknowingly done that may have convinced you they had chosen someone else. That final message stopped your soulmate cold because the witness wasn't blaming anyone else this time. They were pointing directly at a decision your soulmate had made without understanding how it would look from your side. During the period when everything became confusing, your soulmate had allowed someone close to them to speak on their behalf. At the time, it seemed harmless. They were overwhelmed, emotionally exhausted, and convinced that giving the situation space would prevent things from becoming worse. But the witness revealed that this person hadn't simply asked for space. They had apparently made your soulmate's decision sound permanent, as though there was no possibility of another conversation with you. Your soulmate had never authorized those words. Yet if that was what reached you, then your silence afterwards suddenly made heartbreaking sense. You may not have walked away because you stopped caring. You may have believed you were respecting a choice your soulmate never actually made. For the first time that night, your soulmate wasn't angry at the person who interfered. They were angry at themselves for trusting someone else to carry words that should have come directly from their own heart. They remembered how strangely quiet everything became afterward. No confrontation from you. No desperate attempt to change their mind. Just distance. Back then, your soulmate interpreted that silence as proof that you had accepted the ending easily. Now they saw another possibility. You may have been hurt enough to step back because you believed continuing would disrespect their wishes. That realization hit them deeply. They began typing your name, deleting sentences, starting again. Nothing felt strong enough to explain what they had just learned. Then they stopped trying to create the perfect message. They understood perfection had already cost too much time. What mattered now was reaching you before another misunderstanding had the chance to take its place. Your soulmate finally typed one sentence: "Can we talk about what really happened?" Their finger hovered over the screen. This wasn't merely a message anymore. Sending it meant rejecting every assumption that had controlled the situation until now. It meant being willing to hear your truth even if that truth hurt. And just as they were about to press send, the witness contacted them again with something even more unexpected. There was apparently a second person who had seen what happened during that critical night, and unlike the first witness, this person had actually spoken with you afterward. Your soulmate's heart started pounding because this meant someone might know exactly what you believed when you disappeared from their life. But the witness added one warning: the second person had kept quiet for a very specific reason. They possessed something connected to your last attempt to reach your soulmate, and if your soulmate saw it, there would be no going back to the version of the story they had believed for so long. Your soulmate didn't hesitate this time. They asked to see whatever the second person had kept hidden, even though part of them feared what it might reveal. Minutes passed without an answer, and those minutes felt unbearably long. Then the response finally arrived. Not with an explanation, but with a preserved record from that critical night. Your soulmate opened it carefully and immediately recognized your words. You hadn't been demanding anything. You hadn't been trying to create drama. You had simply wanted clarity before stepping away. But there was one sentence that changed everything. You had made it clear that if your soulmate truly wanted distance, you would respect it, even though it wasn't what you wanted. Your soulmate read those words again. The story they had believed for so long, that you had simply given up, collapsed in seconds. You hadn't abandoned the connection. You had believed the decision came from them. Now your soulmate understood why the second witness had stayed silent. That person had assumed your soulmate knew exactly what had been communicated to you. They believed the painful distance between you was intentional, even if they personally disagreed with it. Only recently did they discover that your soulmate had never known what you were told. Suddenly, two people who had spent so much time interpreting each other's silence were staring at opposite sides of the same misunderstanding. Your soulmate felt the weight of every missed opportunity at once. But something else in that preserved record caught their attention. There was a reference to a final message you had supposedly sent afterward, a message your soulmate had never received. The second witness remembered you mentioning it because you had waited for a response that never came. And that raised the most important question yet: if you sent something your soulmate never saw, where did it go? The search became urgent. Your soulmate checked old conversations, archived messages, forgotten folders, anything that could explain how something from you had vanished. At first, there was nothing. Then they noticed an unfamiliar gap in the timeline, a place where the sequence of messages didn't quite make sense. One conversation jumped from one date to another with no explanation, even though your soulmate remembered being active during those missing days. Their pulse quickened. Something had been removed, misplaced, or handled without their knowledge. And then they found a trace. Not the complete message, but enough to confirm that something from you had reached their world during that exact period. Your soulmate stared at the timestamp, speechless. Because the record showed your message had arrived before they were told you had chosen to walk away. But the most shocking detail wasn't when it arrived. It was the indication that someone else may have seen it before your soulmate ever had the chance. That tiny indication changed the investigation completely. Until now, your soulmate could still tell themselves that mistakes had been made, that messages had crossed at the wrong time, that frightened people had interfered without understanding the consequences. But this was different. The trace suggested your message hadn't simply disappeared into nowhere. It had entered a space someone else could access before your soulmate knew it existed. Suddenly, they remembered something from that same night. Their phone had been out of their hands for a short period while they were distracted by another conversation. At the time, it meant nothing. Now the memory felt impossible to ignore. Your soulmate began reconstructing those minutes carefully, asking who had been nearby and who already knew they were considering reaching out to you. One name kept returning, and it was the same person who had insisted they wait until morning. Your soulmate didn't confront them. Not yet. They needed certainty, because after everything that had happened, they refused to make another life-changing decision based on assumptions. Instead, they contacted the second witness and asked one precise question: what had you said after sending that final message? The answer arrived quickly. You had apparently waited because you believed your soulmate would finally respond honestly. When nothing came, you didn't immediately become angry. You became confused. Then, sometime afterward, something happened that convinced you silence itself was your answer. That detail struck your soulmate hard. What could possibly have happened between your message and your decision to step away? The witness hesitated before explaining that you had received information from someone claiming to understand your soulmate's intentions. And suddenly, your soulmate realized the interference may have moved in both directions. Then came the detail that made their hands tremble. The person who approached you had apparently used language remarkably similar to what your soulmate remembered saying privately during an emotional conversation, but the meaning had been changed. Words spoken in uncertainty were presented to you as certainty. A temporary need for time had been transformed into a permanent rejection. Your soulmate finally understood why you stopped trying. You weren't waiting for them to choose you over someone else. You believed they had already chosen a life without you. That realization erased the last reason to stay silent. Your soulmate returned to the unfinished message and pressed send. For the first time, the truth was moving directly toward you without another person standing between you. But seconds later, something happened that neither witness had predicted. The person your soulmate suspected suddenly called them, and their first words revealed they already knew a message had just been sent to you. The call came so quickly that your soulmate knew it couldn't be coincidence. They answered without revealing what they had discovered, and for several seconds the person on the other end said almost nothing. Then came a carefully disguised question: "Did you contact them?" Your soulmate felt every remaining doubt sharpen into suspicion. There had been no announcement, no conversation, no reason this person should know that a message had just gone to you. Instead of answering, your soulmate asked how they knew. Silence. Then came excuses, guessing, concern, intuition, but none explained the timing. Your soulmate remained calm and asked one more question: "What exactly were they told about me?" That changed everything. The voice on the other end became defensive, and in trying to explain too much, the person accidentally admitted something your soulmate had never revealed: they knew about your final message from that critical night. Your soulmate's heart sank. There was no longer any way to dismiss the pattern as a series of innocent misunderstandings. They asked directly whether that old message had been seen before they received it. The answer didn't come. Instead, the person tried redirecting the conversation toward the past, insisting that reopening everything would only create pain. But your soulmate heard something underneath those words: fear. Not fear that your soulmate would get hurt, fear that you and your soulmate would finally compare what each of you had actually been told. Stay with this, because that was the moment your soulmate made an unexpected decision. They didn't argue. They didn't reveal the evidence. They simply said, "Then there shouldn't be any problem with me hearing the truth directly." The call went quiet again, and when the person finally responded, one sentence slipped out: "You don't know what they were going to tell you." Those words left your soulmate speechless. Until that moment, they believed your missing message was simply an attempt to repair what had been broken. Now it sounded as though there had been something else inside it. Something important enough that another person feared your soulmate discovering it even after all this time. Your soulmate immediately contacted the second witness again and asked whether they remembered anything more about what you intended to say. The witness couldn't recall every detail, but they remembered you mentioning that you had finally learned something about the interference yourself. You hadn't only been reaching out because you missed your soulmate. You had been preparing to warn them that someone close was deliberately feeding both of you different versions of the same events. And then the witness revealed one final detail: before you stepped away, you had apparently identified the person you suspected, and the name you gave was not the name your soulmate had been investigating all night. That unexpected name forced your soulmate to reconsider everything. The person they had suspected all night may have interfered, but according to what you discovered back then, they weren't the one who started it. There had been someone else operating quietly behind the confusion, someone trusted enough to hear private details from both sides without immediately raising suspicion. Your soulmate searched their memory and remembered how often this person seemed to know exactly when tension appeared between you. They were always nearby with advice. Always ready with an explanation for your behavior. Yet they rarely attacked you openly. That had made them appear neutral. Now that neutrality looked completely different. Your soulmate asked the witness why you had suspected this person, and the answer was chillingly simple: you had caught them repeating something that only your soulmate should have known. That single detail connected pieces your soulmate couldn't connect before. A private fear they had expressed during one vulnerable conversation had somehow reached you, but distorted, stripped of context, and presented as though it were a final decision. At almost the same time, something you had said privately had traveled back toward your soulmate in a similarly altered form. Someone hadn't needed to invent elaborate lies. They only needed to take real emotions, remove the circumstances around them, and deliver them at exactly the wrong moment. That explained why the false versions had always sounded believable. They contained pieces of truth. Your soulmate felt a wave of regret because both of you had been reacting to genuine words without knowing those words had been reshaped. But one question remained: why would this second person care so much about preventing the two of you from speaking directly? The answer began emerging when the witness shared something you had noticed shortly before disappearing. Apparently, you believed the interference wasn't really about romance, jealousy, or choosing sides. You suspected this person feared what would happen if your soulmate became emotionally independent and stopped relying on them for guidance. Your connection represented something they couldn't control, a future in which your soulmate made major decisions without seeking their approval. Suddenly, the manipulation had a motive. And your soulmate realized the person who called moments ago may have been protecting this deeper secret rather than acting alone. Then the phone vibrated again. For one breathless second, your soulmate expected another warning. It wasn't. The notification came from the conversation they had just reopened with you. Their message had been delivered. And beneath it, something appeared that your soulmate had waited far too long to see. An indication that you were there, on the other side, responding. But when your first words finally appeared, they weren't the words your soulmate expected at all. Your words appeared slowly, and your soulmate felt their breath catch as they read them. "Why are you asking me this now?" There was no anger in the question. That somehow made it hit harder. It sounded like someone who had carried unanswered questions for so long that hope had learned to protect itself. Your soulmate began typing immediately, then stopped. They could have explained everything they had uncovered, named the people involved, and poured years of confusion into one desperate message. But they realized that was exactly how this entire situation had become so damaged: too many conclusions, too many people speaking before listening. So your soulmate answered differently. They admitted they had recently learned you may have been told something they never intended to communicate. Then they asked you one simple question: what did you believe I wanted back then? Your response came faster this time, and the answer left them staring at the screen. You told your soulmate that you believed they wanted you completely out of their life. Not temporarily. Not until emotions settled. Completely. You explained that someone had made it sound as though contacting them again would only make things worse, so you stepped away even though part of you desperately wanted one honest conversation. Your soulmate felt sick reading it because those were never their instructions. They had needed time, yes. They had been confused and afraid, yes. But they had never asked anyone to tell you there was no future conversation possible. Then you revealed something even more painful. Before disappearing, you had tried one final time to make sure the decision truly came from your soulmate. You had sent a message asking for confirmation. When no response arrived, someone contacted you afterward and said the silence was intentional. That was the moment you stopped waiting. Your soulmate finally understood what had happened on both sides of that missing message. You thought their silence was a deliberate answer. They never knew your question existed. and someone in the middle had apparently been confident neither of you would compare the two stories. Your soulmate immediately told you, "I never saw that message." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then your response appeared, "Then someone lied to both of us." Those 6 words changed the emotional temperature completely. You weren't speaking as two people guessing about the past anymore. For the first time, you were looking at the same contradiction together. But before your soulmate could tell you the name they had uncovered, you sent another message, one that made them forget everything they were about to say. You told them you still had something from that night, something you had kept all these years because a part of you always suspected the truth would eventually surface. And then you asked the question your soulmate wasn't prepared for, "Do you want to see what they sent me?" Your soulmate answered yes almost immediately, but the seconds that followed felt endless. Then what you had saved finally appeared. It wasn't some dramatic confession. It was far more convincing than that, a message written in calm, deliberate language, supposedly explaining your soulmate's wishes to you. The words made it sound as though they had already decided there was nothing left to discuss and wanted you to stop waiting. Your soulmate recognized pieces of their own private thoughts inside it, but those thoughts had been twisted into conclusions they had never reached. Then their eyes landed on one sentence that made everything inside them go still. It referred to a personal fear your soulmate had shared with only one person during that period. Not two people. Not a group. One person. And suddenly, the question of who had supplied the information was no longer a mystery. Your soulmate told you not to delete anything. They compared the message you had saved with the timeline they had reconstructed that night, and the pieces aligned with frightening precision. The private conversation happened first. Hours later, you received a version of those same thoughts presented as a final decision. Then you sent your last attempt at clarification, the message your soulmate never saw. Afterward, someone assured you that their silence meant exactly what you feared it meant. It was a perfect emotional trap because neither of you had been given enough information to challenge it. But there was something the person responsible hadn't anticipated: you kept the message. Your soulmate still remembered the original conversation. And now, after all this time, both versions existed side by side. The difference between what your soulmate actually felt and what you were told was impossible to ignore. Then you revealed why you had saved it. Even back then, something about the wording had bothered you. It sounded too polished, too certain, almost as though someone wanted to close the door before you could ask another question. You had considered confronting your soulmate directly, but after your final message received no answer, you convinced yourself there was nothing left to fight for. Hearing that nearly broke your soulmate's composure. They finally told you the truth they had been unable to say for years. They hadn't wanted you gone. They had been overwhelmed and confused, but losing you had never been the outcome they were asking for. A long pause followed. Then you typed something unexpected: "There's more." Your soulmate stared at those words, because you explained that the saved message wasn't the only thing you still had. Someone had contacted you again months later. And what they admitted during that second conversation could reveal why keeping you apart had become so important in the first place. That second conversation had happened months after you stopped reaching out, when everyone assumed the distance between you and your soulmate had become permanent. You told your soulmate the contact came unexpectedly. The person didn't apologize or confess directly. Instead, they asked whether you had finally moved past everything, almost as if they needed confirmation that you weren't planning to return. Something about the question bothered you, so rather than revealing how you felt, you asked why it mattered. Their response was strangely defensive. They insisted they were only trying to protect your soulmate from becoming confused again. But then they added something they shouldn't have known. That your soulmate had recently mentioned missing someone from the past. You never forgot that sentence. Because if your soulmate truly wanted you gone, why would anyone be worried that those feelings were returning? Your soulmate felt their chest tighten as they read your explanation. They remembered that period clearly. Months after losing contact with you, they had admitted privately that the separation still didn't feel right. They had said they couldn't understand why thoughts of you kept returning when they had supposedly received such clear signs that you wanted to move on. Once again, that vulnerable confession had been shared with the same person who knew their original fear. And shortly afterward, someone contacted you to make sure you weren't coming back. The pattern was no longer subtle. Every time your soulmate questioned the separation, someone seemed to move quickly to reinforce it. But this time, there was an additional detail. You had challenged the person during that second conversation. You asked whether your soulmate had actually requested that they contact you. The answer was no. They claimed they were acting because they knew what was best. Those words hit your soulmate harder than any accusation could have. Someone had repeatedly made decisions on their behalf while convincing both of you those decisions came from each other. And now that you were finally comparing memories directly, the entire structure was collapsing. Your soulmate apologized, not for feelings they never had, but for allowing other voices to become louder than their own. You didn't immediately respond. The silence lasted long enough to make them wonder whether this truth had arrived too late. Then your message appeared. You weren't asking for an apology yet. You wanted one answer first. There was something you had never understood about the night everything changed. Before you received that misleading message, someone had told you your soulmate was about to make a major decision involving another person. You had believed that decision explained everything. But your soulmate stared at your words in complete disbelief, because no such decision had ever existed. And suddenly both of you realized there was still one fabricated event at the center of this entire story that neither of you had uncovered. Your soulmate immediately asked what major decision you had been told about, and your answer reopened a wound they never knew existed. You had been led to believe they were preparing to build a future with someone else. No specific commitment had been shown to you, but the story came with just enough believable detail to make questioning it feel pointless. You were told your soulmate had been discussing plans privately and that contacting them would interfere with a decision already made. That was why you became so careful. You weren't simply protecting yourself from rejection, you were trying not to disrupt what you believed was their chosen future. But your soulmate knew instantly that something was wrong. During that period, there had been no secret plan, no hidden commitment, no decision involving another person. There had only been confusion, and a growing desire to speak with you before everything slipped away. Then your soulmate remembered one event that could explain how the false story began. Around that same time, they had attended a gathering where another person happened to be present, and someone had taken an ordinary moment.